All right, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time it is. And we'll go ahead and get started. So we'll start by setting our motivation. So we think about the purpose of our course being to reflect and try to internalize the wisdom given by the Buddha, the wisdom that is contained in the stages of the path to enlightenment, the most essential insights that we need to transform our own mind from the mind of an ordinary sentient being to the mind of a fully awakened Buddha. And we recognize that the purpose of accomplishing that is primarily because enlightened beings are the kind of beings that are most effective in benefiting others. We recognize that there are ways in which we can help right now, but they're limited. We want to be of extraordinary benefit to sentient beings. So we must tap into, unlock our potential. And we do that by following in the footsteps of the Buddha. So I try to generate those minds of confidence in the wisdom left to us by the Buddha and bodhicitta spurred by great love and great compassion, wanting to achieve that result, primarily to be of benefit to others. All right, with that motivation, we'll turn back to the material. And we were just finishing up in the section on the freedoms and the richnesses. We finished the freedoms and in the chapter on precious human rebirth, we finished the section on the freedoms and we began the section on the richnesses. And we had just almost finished the 5 personal richnesses or endowments. I think richnesses is consistently used in Lamrim Year. So there's 5 personal richnesses and 5 richnesses that you could say are environmental or they depend upon the presence of a Buddha in the world. So the 5 personal freedoms relate to one's own body and mind, and then the 5 environmental are not up to our body and mind. They depend upon the presence of an enlightened being in the world. So the last of the 5 personal personal richnesses is an interesting one because we it can be phrased in different ways. Some of them are a little bit softer than other ways, or they're a little bit more um, magnanimous, maybe, because in terms of what it actually means, um, one way of saying it is having a genuine interest, a genuine desire in spiritual growth and development. That's kind of like the broadest way of saying it, and that's certainly true of anyone who is taking time out of their life to study and practice. Um, but a more specific way of phrasing it is really um, having confidence in the teachings. Not just broadly speaking, being interested and wanting to be more compassionate, more, because there's many different valid ways of accomplishing that goal. Whereas technically, um, really what is meant is having strong confidence in the Buddhist path. And this is the richness that counters the freedom of, um, as we said, the way that Lama Zopa phrases it, being a heretic, which we talked about that word being kind of a heavy word, but um, being someone who holds strongly to a philosophical view, even if it's nihilism. Nihilism is a philosophical view. Doesn't have to be like a different religious view. It could be a holding strongly to a view of nothingness. That just when we die, we turn to ash, and that's it. So, but holding strongly to some sort of interfering philosophical view. This this richness of having confidence in the teachings is the antidote to that, the flip side of that freedom. Um, and that's what's interesting is that true? Does that actually characterize our experience right now? Is that accurate? Can we say that we do have that strong confidence in the teachings? Uh, so this is on day 75. Um, no, I'm sorry, day 76. Or is it? Sorry. Day 75 is the next one. So sorry. Right. So sorry. Day 74. We're on day 74. And so here he says, having devotion to the teachings is how he phrases it, which again is different. That's a stronger idea than saying, I genuinely want to be a better person. I genuinely want to be more compassionate. Here he's saying having devotion. And we've looked at the word devotion. I used the word confidence, just a few seconds ago, because devotion here is really the same word that we used in guru devotion, which again meant confidence. In English could be translated as confidence, having, or faith is another, but faith isn't blind faith. It's not the faith that we are used to in our culture. It's really the idea of confidence. And confidence can come from putting the teachings into practice, seeing some results, and then developing that sense of confidence. It doesn't mean necessarily just reading something and then saying, "Oh, well, that must be true." But this one, technically speaking, if we don't have any confidence, we might have the other richnesses. We might have We've been born human, we've been born in a central land, we've been born with a body and mind that works well enough to comprehend the material, and we haven't created the five actions of immediate retribution. But the last one, having devotion to the teachings, um, that one is something that we have to cultivate over time. Really, it's not it doesn't just characterize our existence by definition. And it's something that grows, I think, over time. I think that just like guru devotion, we talked about how it is a realization that becomes deeper and deeper gradually over a long period of time due to repetition, due to effort, that the guru devotion that we have when we start training in guru devotion could be characterized in a particular way. But 10 years later, we would hope that the guru devotion that we would have is very different, can be characterized in a very different way. And so this, I think, is also at play here, that um, we may have a certain degree of confidence in the teachings, but like I said, that confidence, in one way, it depends upon seeing the result of effort, of our own efforts. So until we've put in enough effort to begin to see those results, then by definition we haven't done the work that creates that confidence, that level of confidence. And it's by definition unavailable to us until we do that. And like Venerable Rabina says, if we get to a point where we've tried to put the teachings into practice and we've demonstrated to ourselves that the teachings are false, then we must reject the teachings. Um, and it just so happens that that's not people's experience. When people you know actually do that work, then reliably they see things in that way. They, like the Four Noble Truths, the four things that are known to be true by those who have a direct perception of the nature of reality. That's the framework for all of the Buddhist teachings, is once beings can see reality directly, they've been able to recognize that it's characterized by unsatisfactory conditions that have a particular cause, but that cause is adventitious, it's removable from the mind, and that there's a way of training the mind that cultivates that ability to remove those adventitious stains that cause the unsatisfactory conditions. It's not a hypothetical framework, it is the experience of those who see reality directly. But we don't see reality directly, and so we have a different experience. So that's interesting. And maybe just briefly to go back, because we talked, I don't know, maybe we did, maybe because we talked about the 5 actions of immediate retribution last time. I thought there was something that we no, I guess it was just that last one, having devotion to the teachings. Um, that was the one that was remaining. We kind of rushed through drawing blood from the Buddha, but maybe we covered it sufficiently. So those are the 5 personal richnesses. Having been born human, having been born in a central land, having been born with a body and mind, sufficiently capable of comprehending the teachings, being free from the 5 actions of immediate retribution. Oh, maybe the one thing that I was going to say is that I don't like the word retribution, uh, which is how it's commonly, the 2 common phrases are the 5 actions of immediate retribution or the 5 heinous actions. I don't really like either of them. I mean, they're both, but retribution kind of makes it sound like something is being done to us, that it's a punishment. And that's why I guess they figured in English that was the best choice. But we did cover the meaning of it. A lot of times what we really have to do is look past the words that people have agreed to use and just focus on the meaning, the definition, because the definition is a karma that is so strong that it will ripen at the death of the lifetime in which it was created. Um, that's what it means. So what you call it doesn't matter. That's what it means. Because if you drop a hammer on your foot and you break your foot, no one's punishing you. You just created a cause to experience a result, and the result wasn't great, but you simply created the cause to experience that result. It's not a punishment, it's just cause and effect. So retribution is a really, is not a good word, because it makes it sound like there's some sort of intelligence that didn't like what we did and is harming us in return, which isn't the idea. Um, so those are the 5 personal richnesses. Any thoughts or questions about the 8 freedoms or the 5 richnesses that we've now, 5 personal richnesses that we've now covered? All right. So now we move on. So there are 10 richnesses in total, 8 freedoms and 10 richnesses for the 18 qualities of a precious human rebirth. So the 5 remaining richnesses are environmental or external to oneself. And so those, and again, like I said, those relate to the presence of enlightened being in the world. So they are having been born at a time when a Buddha has descended, being born when the teachings have been revealed, being born when the complete teachings continue to exist, being born when the teachings are being followed, and having the necessary conditions to practice Dharma. So these all relate to the existence of the complete path to enlightenment as a living tradition in the world. Because a Buddha, like we've said in previous classes, there are many world systems where you find humans. No Buddha has ever yet appeared because the karmic conditions are not right for a Buddha to appear in the world. Buddhas could appear in the world but not teach. So it is a fully enlightened being, but not a wheel turning Buddha. Um, and and then they could teach, but something could happen subsequent to that that wipes out that knowledge, that wisdom, a war, some sort of cataclysm, um, maybe writing wasn't well enough established. There's all kinds of reasons why there might have been knowledge or wisdom at a certain time, but it is no longer present in the world. Um, or it could be that it's just sort of a broken tradition that, like, there are probably ancient Egyptian um, wisdoms, ways of venerating certain um, gods that were thought to have existed in certain rituals and practices and so, but they're not clear anymore to anyone. No one knows about them. No one is able to connect with them. Maybe there's a lot of debate or confusion about exactly what this temple means or what this tablet means. But at the time, 3,000 years ago, maybe it was a very rich tradition or practice that many people were engaging in. And Buddhism certainly could be like that, when people debate about why, what this means, or because it's a broken, that the lineage, the transmission over time just has broken. Um, that's certainly a possibility, but luckily not true for our world at present. But it is in day 75, Lama Zopa says the teachings still exist, but their time is almost up. There are still great teachers, but how long will they be around? The time is fast approaching where practicing Dharma will be totally impossible because the teachings will no longer exist on this planet. So I don't know off the top of my head. They talk about, I can't give you like the number of years or the number, um, but they talk about different ages or different eras. Um, and they talk about this being the era of degeneration, where the teachings are, in decline. And they don't necessarily mean that, because, from our perspective, it kind of looks like almost like the renaissance of the teachings, in the sense that if you look at America, 100 years ago, 75 years ago, almost impossible to practice, Buddhism in America. But they don't necessarily mean it just in terms of that. They really mean it in terms of like authentic practice, like not, and because, I mean, sadly, if you look at a lot of countries that are Buddhist, the way that it's practiced is very superficial for a lot of people. And certainly that's there are, in every Buddhist country, of course, there are very devoted, very effective, very sincere, very learned practitioners, absolutely. And even, of course, in many countries that are predominantly Christian, etc. But it is the case that for a lot of practitioners, the way that they do practice is kind of superficial. There isn't widespread um, study, widespread deep philosophical understanding. And so, and I can't, certainly there's still value in making prayers, reciting mantra, going to making offerings, doing the sorts of things that are more widespread than the serious philosophical study, which is more rare. Um, but if that serious philosophical study becomes more and more rare over the next couple of 100 years, that's really the engine that allows these generational transmissions to take place. Um, and certainly the invasion of Tibet was a very serious upheaval in that process. Of course, a lot of those monasteries have been able to be reconstituted, but still, people will tell you that it's not quite the same as it was. It's not. And also modernity, and technology. There's a lot of distraction now that didn't exist 100 years ago, even for the monastics in the Indian monasteries and the Thai monasteries, and there's a pull away from that kind of lifestyle. And as that grows, of course, then that monastery system that produces enlightened beings, or is one method of producing enlightened beings, is under threat. So there is, even at the time of the Buddha, it was clearly explained, that this was predictable, that this is what, that there's this ebb and flow of these causes and conditions. And it's very clearly said in the teachings. And again, like I say, I think, I mean, in the teachings, I don't know if we're meant to understand it literally or metaphorically, but there are, like, years given to these different periods. And it is thought that there isn't a great deal of more time before the teachings, you know, and they also talk about how the human lifespan is decreasing. And again, that doesn't look true to us because we see that due to medical intervention, people actually live longer now than they did 100 years ago. But really, what from the Buddhist perspective, what's happening is that right now it's easier for people to reach the karmic limit of a human lifespan, but that karmic limit is decreasing over time, over longer periods of time. Um, so this age of degeneration doesn't only affect, I mean, there's a whole series of external causes and conditions that have an impact on the presence of the teachings in the world and our ability to practice them. Um, and so they talk about how there will be a time when it's almost impossible. And then they talk about Maitreya being the next wheel turning Buddha, and Maitreya will appear in the world, and then that will be the age of Maitreya's teaching in the world, because now we're in the age of Shakyamuni's teachings in the world. But when Maitreya appears, then the teachings will be reconstituted and people will be under that era. Um, but still, you know, Lama Zopa says, in terms of, right now, all of the teachings, the sutra teachings, the Vajrayana teachings, they're all still living traditions in the world. And if you think about, how long the lower realm lifetimes are, if it's true, and I don't know, it's not, it seems like it's presented as true that that all of these different realms, that time is concurrent in, and stable across, so that I mean, it seems to me that it's presented that way. It probably better to ask someone else if it's really that way, but it seems like it's presented that way, where they would suggest that if a person dies on earth in X year and then takes a rebirth in the hungry ghost realm, which is, could be tens of thousands of years, then their next opportunity to be reborn on planet Earth is literally tens of thousands of years, Earth years later. That seems to be the way that it's presented. Um, and that just means, we're one bad rebirth away from, and of course, like I say, there's many different realms where there are humans. But I have heard that human realms with complete sutra and complete Vajrayana teachings of the human realm, of all of the human world systems, those two things being revealed and being living traditions is even much more rare than just the sutra teachings having been revealed. So this planet at this time is an incredibly precious place, due to all of the sutra teachings and all of the Vajrayana teachings having been revealed and still being living traditions. Um, so, yeah. Mhm.
So what is the cause of the different ages? Is it like a collective karma of sentient beings? Or like what is
So the question from the Gompa is like, what causes this kind of ebb and flow of the different ages, the different eras. And I don't, other than your suggestion of it being collective karma, because um, the existence of a realm depends upon the collective karma of the beings inhabiting that realm. So, of course, there's the upper realms where you can take rebirth. So like when there's a sufficient number of sentient beings who have a similar karmic ripening, then that is what allows for a particular place for those sentient beings to exist. Um, so, the earth wouldn't exist. This earth, wouldn't exist without beings who had the karmic experience to uh, take rebirth on the earth. Now, the earth can be totally destroyed, and there would still be places that would be close enough where you would just take rebirth there instead. Um, but, and then of course, we do live on a planet where there are the teachings and so on. But if we look at the billions and billions and billions of humans, how many of them care about that? How many of them have any interest in that? How many of them actually know or appreciate? Or so that's a very specific karma that is ripening. Because for the vast majority of the humans on Earth, yes, they live on a planet where there was a Buddha and where the teachings, but they don't know about that. They don't care about that. That's of no interest to them. So we can't really say that they were born here because of a ripening of that kind of karma, because it's irrelevant to them that that's true, that characterizes. But there are others for whom that is very relevant. They gravitate to those teachings, they practice those teachings. um, so it isn't like we certainly the earth is not a pure realm where only practitioners are born, where only people who um, experience this come to experience this because of a relationship to the teachings. There's a wide variety of karmas that can cause that rebirth. Um, but it's kind of like, yeah, I don't know what will cause the kind of resurgence, because basically what the teachings suggest is that to be human long ago, that the human realm long ago was very different than it is now. That those beings that were classified as being in the human realm, their bodies were more energetically based. They weren't so much flesh and blood. Um, that they had incredibly long lifespans. Karmically, the upper limit was incredibly long. And then there's been a process of that changing over very, very long periods of time. So that's not relevant to the earth. The earth didn't become a place. No one's suggesting that, prior to the cavemen, that there were light beings inhabiting the earth or something like that. They certainly were elsewhere. They were on other kinds of, and only when it had changed to the point where roughly it's like our bodies, um, did this planet become a place where humans began to exist. um, and so it's been a really long process of that changing. But then they say that once it reaches a really low point, um, that it will begin to go up again. Um, and the karmic causes of that, um, it must in some way be related to virtue and how easy or difficult it is, because they talk about how the afflictions were quite lighter in the mind at that time, and they became more prevalent over time. But I'm not, other than like Maitreya's presence, maybe that will kickstart a, a process of virtue becoming easier, and therefore the karmic causes shifting again and moving in a different direction. But of course, the presence and the Shakyamuni Buddha wasn't the only Buddha. He was the most recent wheel turning Buddha. But his presence, of course, didn't halt or reverse this trend. So, I mean, that'd be a good question to ask a Geshe, or something like that. Geshe Zopa, who's coming in March, or something like that about the overall. But yeah, I don't know. Has anybody heard a teaching on that, or from a high lama? Yeah, that's all I know. Not very much.
Because you mentioned something, so I can look into it.
Okay. Okay. So then on day 76, Lama Zopa is, so now we've covered all of the 18 qualities, the 10 freedoms, and the 8 freedoms and the 10 richnesses. We've covered all of those. So really, the method then of internalizing these 18 is to think about them in relation to one's actual life, to and there's 18 of them, so it is a long meditation. If you try to do all 18 in a single session, that can take a while, and that may not be the most skillful method, to try to cram all 18 contemplations into, because it's going to take at least half an hour, if not 45 minutes, to really go one by one through 18 different things. So you might want to break that up into at least two, maybe doing but I also think that there's value in doing, looking at them as a complete set within a relatively short period of time, so that the energy, the sort of momentum, isn't lost. I wouldn't, do the freedoms on Monday and then 2 weeks later, not do it, not think about it again, and do the, richnesses. So if you wanted to do 2 sessions, in a day, then you could do the freedoms and the richnesses as 2 separate contemplations. But I think it's good to have that the memory, the mindfulness of both sets of conditions in the mind, in a shorter period of time. Yeah. Uh, so what Lama Zopa is talking about now is the implication of that. What is the result? What is the purpose of doing that? What is the purpose of spending time applying, checking, analyzing, was I born human? Was I, and then also thinking about how painful and difficult the other, because again, every contemplation is different. When we're contemplating the freedoms, we're trying to really generate a sense of relief, a sense of joy almost, that these incredibly difficult conditions that have for eons and eons characterized our own past lives are not currently characterizing the life that we possess. And then, still kind of also joy with the freedoms, with the richnesses, where we're thinking of all of the incredible things that are true about our existence, um, and and then just thinking how extraordinary, that all of these have come together. Purpose of that is to, as we have kind of said, to turn away from the mistaken view that this is meaningless, this is easy, that this is, everyone possesses this, it's no big deal, it's not something. So what Lama Zopa is now going to really talk about is using that kind of joy to give us the energy and the space in our minds to extract the essence of that opportunity, to use that in the best way. So on day 76, the quotation is, wasting this perfect human rebirth is like having a winning lottery ticket and not bothering to cash it in. Um, so here he talks about overcoming. Yeah, so overcoming complacency is kind of what he's talking about here. That view that we would otherwise have of just thinking, you know, it's so common to be human, doesn't really matter, it must be easy. Um, but, he's saying that these um, freedoms and richnesses are hard won because we've created so much virtue in the past, that have given rise to the coming together of these 18 qualities in a single lifetime. We might have two of them. You might find people that have two of them or five of them. Like I said, you know, if we're just missing the one about having confidence in the teachings, having a real interest in the teachings, that characterizes billions and billions of people, because nowhere in the richnesses or the freedoms does it talk about having a certain income, having a certain, so I mean, yes, we could say that it's difficult to practice if you have crushing poverty. Of course, they talk about living in a central land, so it's important that the teachings aren't suppressed. It's important, but really, I mean, Tibet was a very poor country, and India, there's lots of places in India, and even the monasteries that exist, there's a lot of obstacles there. If you study the history of the monasteries in India for the past 50, 70 years, the hardships that they had to overcome, and even just having food, many of them, food was really not easy. Now in 2023, that's been kind of, for the most part, in most monasteries, taken care of. But they studied under very difficult conditions for decades and decades, where they didn't eat that often. Um, so yeah, and the diseases of diabetes and heart disease because of the poor nutrition, and yeah, it was a real obstacle. So what a perfect human rebirth doesn't mean that we're rich, that we have tens of thousands of dollars that we can travel, but it does mean that we have access to the teachings, that the teachings exist, and things of that sort. But that characterizes billions and billions of people on Earth. Not every person on Earth, but billions of people. But they're missing the one about having confidence in the teachings, actually wanting to put the teachings into practice. Um, and so, if in this lifetime what he's saying is, we need to create those causes and those conditions again in this lifetime, to use this lifetime to generate those same karmic causes and conditions so that they are true again in the future. Um, he says we can look at every freedom and richness in the way of taking every experience, of relating it to every experience that we have. So every day that we wake up, thinking, when we look at the Dharma books, when we think about attending and teaching, we can allow that to remind us that we have a perfect human rebirth. When we pass the altar, when we look at a teaching on YouTube, we can think how extraordinary it is that all of this wisdom is available to us just on the internet, just available, any moment of the day. We can get the urge to be like, oh, I wonder what His Holiness taught on most recently. What is his most recent teaching? What is Lama Zopa Rinpoche's most recent teaching? And then we can just go find it. We can just Google it, and then it's right there. We don't have to trek across the Himalayas and be at risk of losing our life to receive the teachings, as was the case for 2,000 years. So he says that anything that happens in our life can be a Dharma teaching, telling us how incredible our life is and how rare these freedoms and richnesses are. Every experience that we have can remind us that we must make the most of every opportunity to practice Dharma and destroy the delusions that still plague us. There is not 1 minute to waste. So, yeah, the one of my one of a teacher that I studied the middle length Lamrim with, he, because Lama Zopa used that idea of like the lottery ticket, because he was kind of in this other example, that teacher was saying, like, what would we do if like Oprah knocked on our door and said, here's my credit card, I just go have fun, but, and then of course the next contemplation is death and impermanence, the next major, which we haven't gotten to, but that's what's coming, down the road. But if Oprah said, okay, here's my credit card, it has no limit, or it has, whatever Oprah's limit is, which, we're not going to reach. But then she was like, oh, but I need it back in a day. You've got to turn it back in 24 hours. Like, we wouldn't sleep that night. We would call in sick at work, and for 24 hours, we'd just buy stuff. We wouldn't go out to eat. We wouldn't, people come and knock on the door, we'd be like, I'm sorry, Oprah's credit card, you need to go away and I'll see you tomorrow. And for 24 hours, every moment of that day would be spent utilizing that opportunity, because she just told us we've only got 1 day. And compared to a perfect human rebirth, that's absurdly silly, and meaningless, because then we just have a new car and a new house and a bunch of new clothes and a bunch of electronics and maybe a boat, whatever. But that's it. It's just silly material things that don't really bring us happiness, don't really, they make things a little bit easier, but compared to what we can accomplish with a perfect human rebirth, but also it's time limited, which is which is the whole next, what March's, contemplations will be about, is that this opportunity, this incredible opportunity, has an expiration on it. But what's interesting is that we do sleep. what's interesting, right now, we have this perfect human rebirth, but are we complacent, like Lama Zopa is saying? Are we extracting the essence of that perfect human rebirth? Like we would if we had that credit card. We would extract every penny that we could during that time, but are we taking our perfect human rebirth as seriously? Um, or are we being, like as Lama Zopa is saying, do we have complacency that, because this contemplation is meant to overcome complacency. So it's not, that doesn't mean that we're bad people, that we should beat ourselves up. It just means that this contemplation we haven't internalized. And that's the difference. That's why the Lamrim exists, because these are the contemplations that we haven't internalized. And the Buddha is a being who has internalized them, and that's why he became a Buddha. And so it's just an indication that this is something we need to do more of, that we need to study and practice perfect human rebirth again and again and again, because we kind of, our culture, our society, it has taught us the quote unquote value of millions of dollars. That is a highly prevalent part of our society. And so we did internalize that over the last decades. So that's why we would spend millions of dollars if it was available to us. But this isn't part of our culture. This isn't, part of, we haven't internalized this wisdom. And so we're not extracting the essence in the way that we could be, um, and the way that naturally we would once we do internalize this wisdom. He says, through having in previous lives kept pure morality, practiced great generosity, and made stainless prayers to be born with these conditions, we have now received this perfect human rebirth. By doing the same in this life, we can ensure another perfect human rebirth in the future. So those are that's that's in the Lamrim, that's the teaching on karmically, if we want another precious human rebirth, those are the things that we need to do. Those are the karmic causes and conditions: having kept pure morality, having practiced great generosity, and having made stainless prayers to be born with these conditions. Um, so a stainless prayer is a prayer that's made. Um, I don't know that I could list every single like technical aspect, but broadly speaking, it's made as best we can without a mind of self cherishing, a mind of self grasping. So a prayer that wants to achieve, wants another perfect human rebirth, not because it's useful for oneself or not because it's less painful than an animal realm rebirth or something of that sort, but because it's the vehicle that allows us to be of benefit to others. So of course, the best we can do is to kind of say those words at least, and try to generate a feeling of that. Um, we still, of course, when we meditate on the sufferings of the lower realm, of course, a very personal sense of fear arises, or sense of concern arises. Um, but still, um, we want to at least do our best to remove self-grasping and self-cherishing from our aspirations, our prayers. And then I think it's quite likely that sealing our prayers with some understanding of emptiness is also, um, you know, helpful. I mean, it's certainly presented as helpful. Um, so that's probably another aspect of, um, understanding them in that way. But really, I think the main aspect is, as best we can, trying to remove self-grasping and self-cherishing and make the prayer, the purpose of the prayer, about being of benefit. Um, so, of course, prayer then isn't something that a person engages in without a spiritual path. Um, so generosity and ethics, those are also necessary, but a person could be highly ethical and very generous, and at the same time be firmly convinced of a very nihilistic philosophical view. There's many incredibly wonderful, generous people who are nevertheless convinced that nothing beyond this lifetime exists. And so that's why it's not sufficient to only do those two. You have to join that with stainless prayer, which implies a spiritual practice, and then, implies that you're taking your spiritual practice seriously, you're upholding your vows and commitments. All of that is part of that. Um, any thoughts or questions? Nope. So we'll end with, again, Lama Zopa's words that are quite hopeful. Just as this life is the gift of the hard work we did in previous lives, our future lives are determined by what we do now. It is entirely up to us. We prayed strongly for a long time to have this opportunity. Now we have to pray for the opportunity to continue this good work. Whatever rebirth we want is there waiting for us if we create its cause. So that's what we will mull over until Thursday. Any final thoughts or questions? Okay, so we'll then dedicate. So this is again part of stainless prayer, you could say. Dedication is an aspect of stainless prayer, because prayer is just another word for aspiration, just another word for may it be so. So we think about our motivation that we established in the beginning, and I think that having listened and participated in the course, we've created positive energy in the mind, and that positive energy will ripen, will bring about a beneficial effect, and we visualize and dedicate and seal this positive energy, thinking, may it ripen in the best way to be of benefit, genuine benefit to sentient beings. We can bring to mind all of the thousands of people who just lost their lives in the devastating earthquakes, those that are in the intermediate state due to that disaster. I think due to the force of this merit, may they quickly achieve a perfect human rebirth. May they practice the path and achieve full enlightenment as swiftly as possible. You think of those who are injured, those who are grieving, and think that this merit ripens as protection and healing. And then thinking of all sentient beings in all realms. Thinking, may they all swiftly purify their minds and arise in the state of enlightenment. So on your own, try to visualize incredibly vast benefit coming from the positive energy you've created. All right. Okay, so we will carry on Thursday, where Lama Zopa is again going, now that we've covered all of the 18 qualities, he's going to really help us to understand in really deep ways um, how we use the understanding of the 18 qualities to improve our lives. So that's what we'll continue to focus on. All right, thanks for coming.